You live in the real world. Never mind about how many other worlds there are and the planes of illusion. I understand that. But we live in this world. We cross the street looking right and left. We go buy food in the grocery store.
Bernard, the question is how we live in the world, not whether we live in the world because we have taken incarnation here, because that's who you and I happen to be on this level of our evolution, that we end up on this plane together at this moment, knowing each other, at least on this plane. Right. But as Christ points out, one lives in the world but not of the world. And you slowly realize that that this is a form that's manifesting, and you dance with it. You wear it like your clothing. You honor it, you take care of it, you keep it clean and neat, and you find out how it harmoniously expresses itself.
But we have, or what do we have, you tell me, responsibilities to one another, very important ones too. Do we not have our fellow men, our fellow creatures?
Absolutely. And as you listen to hear why you have been incarnated and what function you have within the incarnation, see, this, Bernard, has a function. You as a cosmic, as God, is at play, as at rest, eternally. There's a part of you that is at rest, and then there is this form that has purpose and function. And you are constantly listening to hear what your function is. And the quieter you become, the more you hear your function is that of service, of relieving the suffering that exists, because you experience at one level of consciousness your identity with all other beings. See, behind, as we went through the changing of the channels, there is a place where you and I are one. And if you're suffering, I'm suffering, you see, ultimately. And there's where social responsibility comes in, finally. You aren't who you thought you were. All right? You're just much more than that. And as you extricate yourself from these attachments, it's as if you are going into the space or the ground that lies behind the figures, which are thoughts, the thoughts being the definition of who I am and how the universe is, ego structure, models. You see models as merely models, and you start to rest in your awareness that lies behind the models. It's like you are looking at me now, and if I said, who are you? You could say, I'm a looker, right? Or you could say, I am, and there is looking, right? Like, for example, I am depressed versus there's depression. Those are different levels of identification. Mm-hmm. One, I'm identifying with the depression. I'm depressed. The other is I'm aware that there is depression, and I am in a state of depression. But there is an awareness that is quite independent of that. In that awareness, that spaciousness around the forms is the equanimity.
Okay, well now let's go back in another way, by another path to what we were talking about earlier. You see, you said this depression. You talked about there's the I am depressed, and there is depression and I am. Well, now a hell of a lot of people are depressed and hungry and suffering and ill and dying and in prison unjustly and being beaten on the head by wicked people and so on, all around us, all over the world. What do we do about them? Well, let me put it this way. What do you do about them?
Well, what I do about them is I do everything I can to relieve their suffering. I have projects working in prisons. I work with dying people. I work with the blind. I protest against nuclear energy. I do a lot of things that are political active things. I get involved in politics.
Well, let's, I mean, there are two things there that struck me. One, prisons. Now, you work in prison. How? Yes. What do you do in a prison?
Well, roughly what we are saying is if you have to serve time, use your time to get free of time. Instead of spending all your time in prison being angry of why you got there, if you take a prison, it gives you a cell, food, clothing, and tells you what to do all day. Take a monastery. It's interesting. They give you a cell, clothing, food, and tell you what to do all day. You say, yes, but you were stuck in one and you chose to go in. Right. All right, do you want to spend all the time in prison being preoccupied with how you got there? Or do you want to use the time? And if you can imagine a cell block that has 15 inmates and 3 guards, and the inmates all think they're in a monastery, the only people left in prison are the guards. I mean, if you could see it that way.
Yes, but if you could see it that way, do you make prisoners see it that way?
What we do is we say to prisoners, there is the possibility you could see it that way. If you would like to see it that way and would like some help in seeing it that way, let us help you. We'll send you material. We'll do everything we can. We'll create a pen pal. We'll do everything we can to give you an environment. We'll give you a free book called Inside Out, which will be telling you about people like Gandhi and Aurobindo and lots of people who served time in jail and used their time in order to become more conscious. I've met people who've been in solitary confinement, and I look into their eyes and I see an eternality, and I say to them, how'd you do that? I mean, these are people that were on death row. And I say, how are you getting so clear? And they say, well, solitary, man, my. I mean, and that's what, in India, you go and you seek solitude in order to do inner work. And in prisons you say, if you're not good, we'll put you in solitude, you see. And you can flip the whole thing around. So the state is actually supporting your becoming a much deeper, more profound, more equanimous person that could actually contribute to the society by bringing peace and love and presence rather than anger and feelings of revenge and so on.
Wherein then does this differ from what we think of as prison visiting? There are plenty of people who work in prisons, cheering prisoners up, if you like, trying to make them understand, trying to reform them, if you like, so they will not go back to crime when they're released, etc.
I don't think you do anything to another human being. I think what you do, Gandhi had a very good image. He was traveling on a train, and a reporter rushed up and said, Mahatmaji, give me a message to take back to my people. And he scribbled on a piece of paper something and handed it out, and it said, my life is my message. And I think that what you realize is that you work on yourself and you become an environment which allows another person to grow if they are in the point of evolution where they wish to grow. And if they aren't, you leave them alone. You stop coming on to people. I'm not a proselytizer. I got nothing to sell. There's nothing to join. That's not the part of it. For a prisoner, it's merely allowing them to conceive of the possibility that they could use it differently. All right? That's very different than cheering them up.
Right.
Pleasure and happiness is not the business I'm in. I'm in the business of freedom. It's very different. I'm in the business that Christ was in and that Buddha was in and all of these beings like Muhammad and so on.
Well, now you also I see that, how that interacts with a prisoner in his trap, in his cell. You also mentioned working with the dying. Yes. Well, you haven't much time there, have you? I mean, a man's dying, a woman's dying, they're dying. And the point about the prisoner in 10 years solitary, he's got time to work through all this, a dying person hasn't, or have they?
Well, you've got to first of all have the image in the Dying Project of where you're going with it. And to give you a feeling for it, let me just tell you this brief story. There was a time when one country was overrunning another, which was Buddhist, and they were being very fierce with the Buddhist monks, disemboweling them and killing them. And there was a particularly fierce commander of the invading army, and when he would come into a town, the monks would all flee into the mountains. And he came into this town, and he asked his adjutant for a report, and the report was, all the monks have fled into the mountain but one. And he got furious about this one monk who defied him. And he walked into the monastery and he pushed open the doors, and there was the monk standing right in the middle of the courtyard. And he walked up to him and he said, "Don't you know who I am? I could take my sword and run it through your belly without blinking an eye." And the monk said, "And don't you know who I am? I could have your sword run through my belly without blinking an eye." And at that point, supposedly the commander bowed and left, right? Because that's an Eastern country. Now, once you have started to awaken and extricate yourself from identification, one of the first things you break the identification with is your own body. And you see, in India, they call it dropping the body and dying. Ramana Maharshi, a great Indian saint, was dying. And his people said, "Don't leave us, heal yourself." He said, "No, this body's all used up." And they said, don't go. And he looked perplexed, and he said, "Where could I go? I mean, I'm only dropping my body. It's like I'm only selling my Ford. I'm not going anywhere." See, once that identity is broken. So what I'm looking for is opportunities in life for awakening. For those who wish to awaken, to show them that these are opportunities and help them use them, and help me use them in the same token. So prison is an opportunity for awakening. Relationships are an opportunity. Dying is a beauty, because at the point of dying, most of the power trips you've had going start to fall apart.